He didn't flirt. He didn't touch. He just smiled, and for some reason I broke. My name is Vanessa. I am 50 years old. I know women who say that with pride, like it's a war they survived. Like every line on their face has a backstory and a metal pin to it. I used to be one of them in theory. The kind who'd raise a glass and say something defiant about aging and wisdom and how laugh lines mean you lived. But lately, I don't feel wise, or brave, or alive. Mostly, I feel like wallpaper. Present. Faded. Overlooked. And I suppose that's what made his smile feel like a match dropped in a dry field. It started simply enough. A Saturday. My husband had offered to finally deal with the mess in the garage, the towers of forgotten boxes, half-broken furniture, tools that hadn't been touched in a decade. He'd recruited a coworker from the office to help. I didn't ask who. I assumed it would be someone middle-aged, like him. Someone quiet. Predictable. Liam was not what I expected. He was younger. Much younger. 30, he said later. The kind of 30 that still looked like 25, but carried himself like he knew better. Taller than average, but not imposing. Broad shoulders, yes, but there was something soft about the way he moved. Like he didn't want to disturb the air around him. He shook my hand when he arrived. His palm was warm. His grip firm, but not too much. He smiled. Not the kind of smile that was trying to win something. Just kindness. I told myself it was nothing. It was. I offered them water first, then coffee. My husband declined. Liam accepted. Black, no sugar. I made it without thinking, the way I make everything now. By muscle memory. The body performing while the mind wanders. I brought it to him and said something about the weather. He said something back. I can't remember what. I was too distracted by the way he looked at me when I spoke. Like I mattered. We sat for a while at the edge of the kitchen. My husband had gone back to sort through something. Liam stayed, cradling the mug in both hands like it was colder in the house than it really was. He asked me about the garage, then about the house. Then something shifted. He asked about me. Not in the polite, small talk way. Not in the how do you take your coffee kind of way. He asked what I liked to do with my time. What I used to dream about. Whether I'd ever traveled alone. I don't know how to explain it, but there was something in the way he listened. Like he was writing it down somewhere. Like he didn't want to miss anything. I talked more than I should have. Said things I hadn't said out loud in years. Nothing scandalous. Just true. He smiled again. Just once. And for some reason, I broke. Later that evening, after the garage had been declared a success, and my husband had gone upstairs to take a nap, I stood in the kitchen staring at the coffee mug Liam had used. Still in the sink. His fingerprints were probably long gone, but I could still see where his hands had been. It was stupid. I told myself so out loud. You are 50, I said, as if age were some kind of shield. He is 30. He was polite. That is all. But my hands were trembling. Not from desire. Not in any dramatic, romantic way. It was something more elemental than that. More humiliating. I felt exposed. Like someone had looked straight through the skin and found the hollow part. And smiled anyway. The next morning, I did what women like me are trained to do. I made eggs. I folded laundry. I returned overdue emails. I said, honey, how did you sleep? With just enough warmth to pass for affection. My husband didn't notice anything different. Maybe because nothing had really happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about Liam's voice. About the pause before he answered me. About the way he held eye contact without demanding anything. It was maddening. On Wednesday, my husband mentioned him again. Said he might come back next weekend to help install the new shelves. I nodded and said, that'd be nice, too fast. I spent the rest of the day rearranging the spice drawer. I hated myself for it. I hated how easily I remembered the sound of his shoes on our hardwood floor. The way he tilted his head when he listened. The way he didn't interrupt. The weekend came. Liam arrived again. This time in a different shirt. Blue. Simple. But it made his eyes look, never mind. I offered coffee again. My husband said he'd pass. Liam accepted. We sat again. Not long, maybe 10 minutes. Enough to discuss travel plans, childhood games, his mother's garden, my abandoned novel draft. And again he smiled. No lines were crossed. Not even close. But when he stood up and thanked me, I felt like I had to grip the back of the chair just to stay upright. Sunday night, I couldn't sleep. My husband snored gently beside me, oblivious. And I lay awake, eyes open to the dark ceiling, wondering when I had become so breakable. It wasn't Liam. Not really. It was the space he left behind when he walked out the door. The echo of being seen. The way it made everything else in my life look suddenly dim. And it was just coffee. But I am not the same. It wasn't the coffee. It wasn't even the silence. It was the way he looked at me. Like the space I took up in the world wasn't an afterthought. Like I hadn't been erased by decades of predictability. Like I still mattered. I've spent years being looked through. Not looked past, which is quicker, cleaner. Looked through like glass. Like furniture. Like something people navigate around without conscious thought. And then Liam looked at me like I was there. Like I was interrupting his world without even trying. Not loud. Not bold. Just present. The first few days after that second visit, I tried to laugh it off. I played the part of the amused adult woman. 50 and flattered. How quaint. How embarrassing. How foolish. I told myself he was just polite. Just attentive. Maybe a little awkward, the way kind-hearted people often are. I made up a history for him. A good mother, books on manners, some internal compass tuned toward empathy. But that explanation didn't hold. Because kindness, real kindness, has weight. And what I felt when Liam looked at me wasn't lightness. It wasn't harmless. It was pressure. Gentle, quiet, insistent pressure on every part of me I thought I'd buried. He saw me. Not in a way that asked for anything. Not in a way that expected performance. Just saw. And it undid me. The third time he came over, it was raining. He texted my husband ahead of time, offering to help install shelving in the newly cleared garage. I heard my husband's voice through the walls as he read the message aloud. Casual. Grateful. Unaware. I stood in the laundry room, holding a warm towel against my face longer than necessary. The scent of detergent and old hope. I don't know why it made me want to cry. When Liam arrived, I was slicing apples in the kitchen. A silly, symbolic thing I haven't baked in years. But I wanted to feel like someone who did. He stepped through the threshold with his usual calm. Shook the water from his coat. Ran a hand through his damp hair. I said something inane about the weather, about how spring in this town always forgets to warn you. He smiled, of course. And it hurt. That smile. That stupid, soft, effortless smile. It hurt because I wanted to be the reason for it. He brushed past me on the way to the garage. Our arms didn't touch, but the air did. My skin prickled. My breath caught. I stared at the apples and couldn't remember if I'd added cinnamon. That night, after dinner, after dishes, after my husband had fallen asleep with the TV murmuring in the background, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual. Not doing anything special. Just brushing my teeth. Smoothing moisturizer over skin that had become more matte than canvas. Lip balm. Eye cream. The rituals of a woman still trying. Still holding the line between routine and surrender. But something had shifted. Because someone had watched me. That afternoon while I poured his coffee. While I bent to wipe something from the floor. While I laughed too softly at a joke I didn't even understand. Liam had watched me. Not hungrily. Not greedily. Just with attention. And I had let him. Worse, I had wanted to let him. I hadn't realized until that moment how long it had been since I felt eyes linger without expectation. Eyes that weren't distracted. Eyes that didn't flick away the moment I stopped being useful. My husband's gaze had turned into something transactional, like checking a weather report. Liam's gaze, it was weather itself. Unpredictable. Felt in the bones. That night I dreamed. Not vividly. Nothing you could paint or describe. Just impressions. A voice behind me in the kitchen sang my name. The heat of a palm against the small of my back. A hand, warm and dry, resting briefly over mine. I woke up to silence. My husband's side of the bed was warm but empty. He was already downstairs, probably flipping through the paper, the news. I stared at the ceiling and felt something unfamiliar and cruel bloom in my chest. I didn't miss Liam. I missed myself. The version of myself that had briefly lived in his presence. The version that had emerged in the reflection of his gaze. A woman not defined by duty. Not condensed to roles. Just a woman. It was terrifying. I tried to shake it. I cleaned. I organized drawers. I rotated the pantry. I did all the things that make women feel like they're in control. But it didn't help. Because the problem wasn't chaos. The problem was stillness. And in that stillness, I remembered the way he looked at me. The fourth visit came without warning. He stopped by to drop off a forgotten tool. My husband wasn't home. I almost didn't answer the door. I almost let it ring. But I opened it. Of course I did. He stood there in a gray jacket, jeans, rain still caught in the threads of his sleeves. I said nothing. I stepped back. He came in. The moment felt longer than it was. He placed the toolbox on the floor and looked around. Familiar, but unsure. He wasn't in a rush to leave. I wasn't in a rush to offer anything. I made coffee. Out of habit. Out of defiance. Out of something I didn't dare name. When I handed him the mug, our fingers brushed. The contact was brief. But it felt like the sound you hear when a switch flips in the dark. Something electric, distant, but definite. He noticed. He said nothing. He just walked to the window, stared out at the garden. Said, "It's a nice view." I don't know why I said what I did. It's ordinary. And then he turned. His eyes met mine. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just slowly, evenly. "Not from here," he said. I blinked. And something collapsed inside me. Quietly. Utterly. It wasn't a line. It wasn't clever. It wasn't even about the house. He was talking about me. I had to sit down. That night, I tried to remember the first time I had felt beautiful. Not admired. Not wanted. Beautiful. And I realized it hadn't been a mirror. It hadn't even been my wedding day. It had been a moment. A pair of eyes. Someone seeing something in me that wasn't made of effort or disguise. And now again, in Liam's eyes. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't flirted. He had just looked. And that was enough to rearrange the furniture inside my soul. When he stood to leave, I followed him to the door. The air between us had changed. Denser. Slower. The kind of quiet that feels like breath held for too long. He hadn't done anything. And yet everything inside me was trembling. He thanked me for the coffee. I said, "You're welcome." But my voice, it sounded like someone else's. Thin. Barely audible. Like it belonged to a woman watching herself from somewhere far away. He paused on the threshold. The storm outside had eased, but its weight remained, thick in the clouds, in the way the wind carried itself. Then he said it. Softly. Not like a challenge, not like a game. "You okay?" 2 words. That's all. And something inside me surged toward the surface. My hands tightened around the doorknob. I felt them before I realized I was even moving. I almost said it. Almost said, "No, I'm not. I haven't been for years. I haven't been anything, really. Just a set of movements in a house built on repetition. I am lists and groceries and gentle silences at dinner. I am folded towels and texts that say, on my way, and empty glances across the couch. I am pretending. I almost told him that when I laugh now, it feels like memory more than impulse. That when I dream, it's of doors I never opened. That I no longer recognize the woman I was before life became a series of things to maintain. But I didn't. I smiled instead. A practice thing. Just wide enough to be polite. Just brief enough to be forgettable. I said, I'm fine, and held the doorknob like a lifeline. He looked at me a moment longer. Something passed in his expression. Not disbelief. Not judgment. Understanding. He nodded. Once. Then he walked away. And I stood in the doorway for a long time after he'd gone. Not because I expected him to turn back, but because I didn't know how to walk back into the house and be the woman I had been an hour ago. That night, I made dinner in silence. My husband talked about something from work. A new policy. A frustrating call. I nodded, inserted phrases where appropriate. He didn't notice I hadn't eaten. Later, he kissed me on the forehead, said I looked tired. I told him I was fine. I had become fluent in fine. I started walking in the mornings, not for health, not for clarity, for distance. It gave me time to breathe without watching myself, time to let thoughts come undone before I had to gather them again. I passed the same houses, the same trees, the same mailboxes, but everything looked slightly altered, tilted. I started writing again. Small things, fragments, sentences I didn't let myself say aloud, pages I didn't sign. Sometimes, kindness feels sharper than cruelty. I miss being missed. What do you call the space between who you are and who you were supposed to become? Days passed. He didn't come back. He didn't need to. His absence filled the room louder than his presence ever had. I could feel him in the silence between chores, in the glance I caught of myself in the mirror, in the way I no longer turned on the hallway light at night, afraid of seeing myself too clearly. It wasn't obsession. It was recognition. He had opened something in me that I had padlocked out of necessity, out of survival, and now it would not close. My husband didn't ask what was different. Maybe he didn't notice. Or maybe he'd learned, over time, not to ask questions with complicated answers. I touched him more, to make up for the way I had left myself. I kissed him longer at night. Let my fingers linger on his shoulder when I passed him in the hallway, not because I felt it, because I needed to believe I still could. The lie was not in the gesture. The lie was in the absence of ache. One afternoon, I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes. Not because I had nowhere to go, but because I didn't know how I wanted to be seen. I used to dress for seasons, for events, for roles. Now I wanted to dress for the woman I almost remembered being. The one who nearly spoke. The one who had stood in her doorway, heart cracking open, and chose to smile instead. I wore a blue blouse. The same shade as the sky the day he asked, "You okay?" He never came back. He didn't need to. That's the thing about moments that change you. They don't always linger. They pass through like breath held too long, like a gust of wind through an open room, rearranging what you thought was fixed. And then they vanish, as if they were never there. But everything is different afterward. It had been 3 weeks. Or maybe more. I lost track. There was no message, no mention. My husband never brought up his name. Perhaps he sensed something, or perhaps he'd never thought about him much at all. To him, Liam was a helpful coworker, a polite young man who lent a hand with shelves and boxes and wires, a name he might forget by next spring. But not me. I remembered. Not him, not really, not his face. Not his voice. Not even his presence. I remembered the feeling, the shift, the slow, deliberate opening inside me that hadn't resealed. The echo of what it felt like to be looked at with no motive, no need. Just attention. The kind that uncovers you. The kind that asks nothing and gives everything. After that day, I kept moving as if I hadn't fallen apart. I washed towels. I called my sister. I organized the linen closet. I baked a pie for the first time in 5 years. My husband said it reminded him of the ones I used to make when we first married. I nodded, smiled, took the compliment, and folded it into the file of things I didn't feel. He suggested we take a short trip. Just the two of us. Maybe the coast. Maybe the mountains. I agreed. I said it would be nice. I used a tone that sounded warm. I even leaned into his side on the couch that night and rested my head on his shoulder. He put his arm around me and kissed my hair. It was comfort, not connection, but something gentler than absence. Still, I was somewhere else. I started dreaming of water, waves that reached for my ankles, tidal pools filled with glass, storms that never made landfall. In one dream, I was standing in the middle of a lake, fully clothed, arms out, and the water didn't touch me. It moved around me, always around, like I was there and not there at once. I began writing again, quietly, in the margins of cookbooks, on the backs of receipts, in the notes app on my phone when my husband was asleep beside me. I wrote phrases that felt like borrowed truths. Being seen is a kind of hunger. What do you do with the love that has no direction? My life fits, but it doesn't breathe. One morning, I opened my underwear drawer and pulled out the set I had bought years ago for an anniversary dinner we never got around to. It was too bright, too soft, too much. I wore it anyway. Not for anyone. Just to feel the hum beneath my skin. Just to remember I could. When I made breakfast that morning, my husband said I looked rested. I told him I had slept well. That was a lie. I had not slept at all. I had sat up in bed until dawn, listening to the sound of our aging house, the tick of the hallway clock, the sigh of the heater kicking on. I thought about the look Liam gave me the last time we stood in the kitchen. The pause, the stillness, the space between his question and my answer. You okay? 2 words. I hadn't answered truthfully. I hadn't answered at all. But my body had answered. In the way it shook when he walked away. In the way I stood frozen in the open doorway long after the wind had changed direction. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't asked for anything. And yet his absence left a shadow. Not the kind that follows. The kind that stays. Some evenings I would stand at the kitchen sink, hands in warm dishwater, staring out at the empty street. I would imagine a version of myself who had said, "No, I'm not okay." Who had stepped outside. Who had followed that ache. I don't know what that version of me would have found. But I envied her. Not because she was braver, but because she chose. I began collecting silences. The pause between songs on the radio. The hush of the hallway when the dryer stopped. The blank space after "I love you" when my husband kissed my cheek. Each silence felt heavier. Not because of what they lacked, but because of what they remembered. One afternoon, I pulled down the mug Liam had used. It was tucked behind the others. Clean. Untouched. I held it for a long time. Then I made coffee. Poured it in. Sat by the window. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just drank. The weight of nothing settling into me like warmth. There is a violence in being seen when you have forgotten how. Not loud. Not sudden. But quiet. Slow. The kind of violence that doesn't wound, just wakes. And when I woke, I didn't know what to do with the world. With my world. With the familiar that now felt too tight. Too soft. Too rehearsed. Liam didn't cause it. He was just the mirror. I saw myself. And that was enough to undo everything. They say the most dangerous thing is desire. I disagree. It's not the wanting that destroys you. It's the remembering. Remembering that you are capable of it. That there are rooms inside you still untouched. That someone once opened a door and didn't walk through, but looked. And in that look, reminded you that you exist. That you are more than what you do. More than what you hold together. More than who you've been for others. You are still a who, not just a what. My marriage continued. The rituals held. Dinner. Laughter. Vacuum lines in the carpet. We went on that trip. We ate by the water. My husband kissed me on the cheek and held my hand across the table. I held his back. And still, I thought of Liam. Not as a man. As a moment. The moment I remembered myself. The moment I realized I was not done being alive. He was just being kind. But kindness, when it arrives at the moment you've forgotten how to feel, is not soft. It is a burn. A tremor. A quiet undoing that leaves you in pieces, not broken, but scattered. And what you gather afterward is not the same. It never is. I no longer wait. For messages. For visits. For glances. But I do notice. The way light hits the floorboards at noon. The warmth of coffee through ceramic. The echo of a voice that asked me once, with unbearable gentleness, "You okay?" And now, finally, in the silence of my own kitchen, in the hush of morning, I can answer, "No. But I'm becoming, and maybe that's more honest than fine. Maybe that's the beginning."